Hi, this is Dr. Richard Ruling, here to share with you on the Total Health Channel. Wanting to look at the trumpets of Revelation 8 and 9 and their context, which is an earthquake that initiates them in verse 5. Somehow, sadly, the Sabbath school lesson wants to spread those trumpets over the history from the time of Christ till now and does not see this earthquake as impending. And there are 3 points I'd like to make concerning it. Number one, it is encoded in Revelation in 5 different places. First of all, in chapter 1, when John heard the noise of a trumpet, a great voice, he was startled. He turned to look. And if you use the rule of first use, because Christ is Alpha and Omega, first and last, that's in verse 11 of Revelation 1, that first use of trumpet is in Exodus 19, verses, I think it's verse 19, where the mountain Sinai, when God came down, it shook. It was an earthquake, mini judgment day, confrontation with God and His law, and people were afraid. Fear God, give glory to Him. That's a message that we should be given but are not, and I believe God is going to do it with the earthquake to make everybody afraid, basically, of Him. We shouldn't fear Him except to disobey and run the other way. If our concept of God is good and we know He loves us, we can run toward Him. I appreciate the illustration that Bill Gothard, whom I consider like an Elijah over the years, has talked to 2 million people in larger cities on institutes of basic life principles, and he asks how, if we know how lions hunt. Okay, a lion hunts when an old lion maybe gets at the end of a field of zebras or gazelle, and the young lions get at the other end of the field. And the old lion gives a roar, and the zebras stampede away from the roar right into the young lions. Well, if we understand God, we should go toward the roar, okay? That's the answer for us. Go towards God. But there's going to be a roar, and based on that, we will either be ready or not ready when it happens. The point that I'd like to make is that that first earthquake in Revelation 1:10, where John heard the voice of a great trumpet, is probably the same earthquake that finished the church of Laodicea in around 63 AD. It was just right across the bay. John was on the island of Patmos, and probably less than 100 miles Laodicea, and a huge earthquake startled him. That's how the ancient church of Laodicea ended, and I like to suggest that that's type and antitype. Modern Laodicea, Western Christianity, similarly. I believe America is going to have a huge earthquake in the near future for all of its sins, from the days of Roe v. Wade, when we have killed 70 million babies, aborted them. God punished Egypt for a few hundred, maybe a few thousand Israelite babies that were slain in Exodus 1. What is He going to do for America, a Christian nation? I do not know, but I think we should be prepared for something very large. And Adventists as well, because we have done badly, okay? Bottom line is that Ellen White saw Loma Linda as a place to have a school for gospel, medical, missionary evangelism. And when they initiated a contract and came down to the day for the deposit to be made, and they had not $1 to pay, but a letter from Ellen White mailed a month earlier from New Jersey arrived on the day due with a check for $5,000. It was to be her school for gospel, medical, missionary work. She wanted natural remedies taught. She saw people, thousands, being trained with the ability of physicians to go from house to house, giving natural remedies, singing gospel songs, Bible readings, praying for the people. And if we had done that, we would be so far ahead today compared to where we are now, with 7 hospitals in Loma Linda, like a cancer growing, okay? That's what another physician likened it to. And the fact is that we don't need more hospitals. We need to understand God's plan of life, and it does not include drugs. Ellen White said that there are many ways to practice the healing arts, but it does not include the use of poisonous drugs. Dr. Harding, head of the pharmacology department at one point, later became dean of the School of Health, shared with me a statement from the textbook of pharmacology, Drill's textbook, on Chapter 5, Mechanisms of Drug Action, that said that every drug by definition is a poison. Pharmacology and toxicology are one. They're the same thing. And the art of medicine is to use these poisons beneficially. Well, that's sort of an oxymoron, but if you understand it and a person's blood pressure is sky high and they're about to burst a blood vessel in the brain, yeah, take a drug if you need to. But far better to learn how to eat so you don't eat greasy fried bacon and things like that that will run your blood pressure up, or caffeine, and that you can learn to live well without high blood pressure. So bottom line is that we have done it poorly. We have we're like the money changers in the temple in the Jewish day. They were making money off the sacrifices, and we are sacrificing people's lives when they could learn how to live so they don't need doctors. If I just tell you my own father's example, he was a graduate of Loma Linda. They call it College of Medical Evangelists back then. And he told me about 65, 66 years ago, 2/3 of a century, that 85% of his patients would get well no matter what he did. 10% he thought he helped, and 5% would die no matter what he did. And if you applied that to Ellen White and what she wanted, 95% of people would be getting well with better foods, better eating, prayer, and they would not need to go back to their doctor month after month for bondage and prescriptions, which are now toxic. The body becomes toxic to that chemical, and sooner or later they have a bad reaction, and that's it, basically. So at this time, the world is in a crisis over medical care that they falsely call health care, and it's not health care at all. When I took internal medicine, we studied diseases and their diagnosis and treatment. That's what medical care is: disease, diagnosis, and treatment. It has nothing to do with health. There's really an inverse relationship to health. The more medical care you get, the worse your health is, and the better your health, the less you need medical care. So sadly, our church, when confronted with medical literature to consider the fact that it's a leading cause of death with prescription drugs, they couldn't see it. They just didn't believe the medical literature and Ellen White's statements. And we have a hospital system that is as much in Babylon as anyone. Okay, and so when the time of judgment comes, and Ellen White saw that God's plan did not conclude that, and the fact that they stole the medical school from her. How? Because when the AMA wanted them to become accredited, they asked Ellen White about teaching pharmacology. She said no. She said no again, a second time. When they went up a third time to see her, she would not even see them. And they reported to the committee that she didn't say no, because they didn't see her, or she didn't see them. But bottom line, I would not want to be living in Loma Linda when Judgment Day comes, and I believe it's impending. Sadly, the Sabbath school lesson does not give that. It conveys that these trumpets are spread out over the 2,000 years since the time of Christ. Well, verse 5 of Revelation 8 shows an earthquake clearly, and it says, "Then the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets prepared to sound, and the first angel sounds, and all the green grass burns up." If that were a literal earthquake, all the green grass on the earth would mean we're finished, because the grains are grasses. Wheat grass, oats, barley, rice are all grasses, and we would be finished. But this is a spiritual application. It's the economy, because James 1:9-11 likens the grass to rich men. As the flower of the grass, so shall the rich man fade. And that's the way it was in Egypt. When God attacked Egypt, he attacked their gods. They worshiped the Nile River. It turned to blood. It was the source of their economy. And it will be again, economy is going to be blown in the near future after an earthquake at the time of the Feast of Trumpets. Ellen White says the types relating to the second advent must be fulfilled at the time of the symbolic service. And we saw it in shadow. She says, "Coming events cast their shadow before in Desire of Ages." I believe that's 636. This happened in 2008 when the U.S. Congress, Senate, approved $760 billion in bailout for banksters. They should have lost their money, but taxpayers had to pay for it. Not good. And but that happened on the new moon of the 7th month, Feast of Trumpets. Rosh Hashanah is called in Hebrew. But the bottom line is that it had timing, so that just like when they anciently blew a trumpet and then came a Day of Atonement 10 days later, the stock market crashed for 10 days. And I believe we're going to see the real deal sometime soon. I think you'll see the earthquake this spring. It's 3.5 years from when Titus came to Jerusalem. In 66 AD, it was 3.5 years before Titus came. I mean, Cestius came 3.5 years before Titus, in 66 AD to 70, and we had the Pope come 3.5 years ago to this spring. Okay, he came in 2015 in the fall. Spring of 2019 is 3.5 years, and we should be expecting. And I just want to give you a heads up, if we see Jerusalem compassed with armies, that was the first sign of Matthew 24, and it doesn't just apply back to 70 AD. Zechariah 14:1 and 2 applies it to the day of the Lord, the end time period. And so we will get a modern heads up when we have to give a midnight cry, the bridegroom is coming, be ready. Okay, and it will be at second Passover, as the days of Noah, when the flood came with Passover timing, but in the second spring month. It was also that way when 5 women missed the wedding. Christ says, watch, you don't understand. It's like a man traveling to a far country. Israelites didn't travel in the winter, but if they took a long journey in the spring and couldn't get back, they were to keep Passover a second month later. They were not excused. And so we need to understand the timing, to watch and pray. It would be unfair for Christ to tell us to watch if there wasn't a when, because we can't be awake every night. Watch meant be awake. It's Gregorio, that's the Greek word, and that's what he asked his disciples to do. He said, watch with me. Couldn't you watch 1 hour? It was the eve of Passover. But in our case, it will be second Passover, because he is the master that took the long journey to heaven, and his return will conform to his law in Numbers 9, verses 10 and 11, second Passover, when we should watch and pray. Ellen White recognizes the need to watch Passover. She said, as he, Christ, ate the Passover with his disciples, he instituted in its place the service that was to be the memorial of his great sacrifice. In its place means Passover. Hello, those were appointed times. It was not just Jewish feasts and ceremonies that are done away with. This has been badly translated from the Bible. Catholic translators added the word is when it says those are shadows. The body is of Christ. Well, it was local church is the body of Christ, and he says, don't let anybody judge you. The local church, the body, can decide how to keep those downs. We just have blown it poorly. We do what we want. We're listening to leaders that are taught way back from when they didn't understand. In Galatians 4:10 is the same idea. Paul was afraid of them, of the Galatians, because they observed days, months, weeks, and so on. Well, they were trying to earn their salvation by keeping the works of the law, and they were hair splitters. They lost the spirit of the occasion. Okay, so we need a different understanding. Paul himself kept those times with believers in Acts 20, verse 6, at Philippi. They were Greeks. And same in Corinth. 1 Corinthians 5:8, let us keep the feast, he said. So, and he said, follow me as I follow Christ. Somehow we are siding with the little horn, the papacy, that brags about getting rid of those Jewish festivals. Well, they weren't Jewish. That God said they were my feasts, okay, and they were supported by statutes forever. Did God forget that Christ was going to die on the cross and they'd be nailed to the cross? Bad translation as far as our understanding goes. They were appointed times. The word moed is in Genesis 1:14. From Christ was the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. God had a time appointed before the Jews ever sinned. Okay, so bottom line, we have a lot to learn. We need to be ready. Heads up if we see Jerusalem. I'd like to say that today, this book, Earthquake and Seven Seals, will be free on Amazon. If you go to the link below this video and you see it, go to get your free copy. If you don't have a Kindle, you can download an app that will let you read it on your phone or computer. And if you don't hear it today, it's still worth the $2.99. It's worth far more than that. If we understand how to make a covenant with those 7 seals, we can be ruler over all that he has. That's the promise in Luke 12:44. And if we don't understand, we're not ready, we will be beaten with stripes. That's what he says in that wedding parable of Luke 12. It has 7 parallels to the Laodicean message. Both places are get a knock. Both are to open. Both get a meal if we do open. And ruler over all that he has is the same as sit with me on my throne in Revelation 3:21. Lots to learn, but hey, please study this. It's not, to whom much is given, much is required, and we can't just sit in church and absorb and think that we're with everybody else and going to be saved. Ellen White saw the church in apostasy when the Lord comes, till the Lord comes, she said, in Special Testimony Series B, and they burned that book in the basement of the General Conference. Okay, not a good idea, I believe, and we need to look and consider it. Some of this is on the website, thebridegroomcomes.wordpress.com. Thebridegroomcomes.wordpress.com. You can read articles there that show us where we're really at. Thank you for giving this a look. Please get a copy of the book Earthquake and Seven Seals, and we'll see you at the top. God bless you.